The smell of barbecue smoke mixed with gunpowder hung thick in the humid Chicago air as Sarah Martinez adjusted the red, white, and blue tablecloth for the third time. Her backyard was a symphony of American news streamers hanging from the old oak tree, a cooler packed with ice-cold beer, and her famous potato salad sitting proudly on the picnic table. But her eyes kept drifting to the sliding glass door, waiting for her 17-year-old son Jake to emerge from his room. "Mom, you're gonna wear a hole in that tablecloth if you keep fussing with it," laughed her sister Maria, balancing a tray of corn on the cob. The two women shared the same dark eyes and determined jawline. Though Maria's laugh lines were deeper from years of easier living, Sarah forced a smile, but her stomach churned with an anxiety she couldn't name. "Jake's been so quiet lately. I just want everything to be perfect for him, you know? It's been such a hard year since David died," Maria finished gently, placing a comforting hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Honey, it's been 8 months. Jake's processing his grief differently than you are." The sliding door finally opened with a soft whoosh and Jake stepped onto the deck. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. At 17, her son had grown tall and lean with his father's sandy brown hair and her own stubborn chin. But today, something was different. His usually bright green eyes seemed clouded, distant, as if he were seeing something far beyond their backyard celebration. "Hey, buddy," called out Sarah's brother-in-law Tom, flipping burgers on the grill. "Ready for some fireworks? Tonight, I got us a primo spot picked out down by Navy Pier." Jake managed a weak smile. "Yeah, sounds great, Uncle Tom." But Sarah noticed how his hands trembled slightly as he grabbed a soda from the cooler, how he kept glancing toward the street as if expecting someone or something. The 4th of July had always been Jake's favorite holiday. When he was little, he'd spend weeks planning their celebration, drawing elaborate maps of where to set up chairs for the best firework viewing. This year, he'd barely acknowledged the date. As the afternoon melted into evening, neighbors began filtering into their backyard. The Hendersons from next door brought their famous cornbread. Mrs. Chen from across the street arrived with enough dumplings to feed an army. Despite Sarah's protests that it wasn't a potluck, the laughter grew louder, the music more festive. But Jake remained on the periphery, nursing the same Coke for 2 hours. "Jake, honey, come eat something," Sarah called out, but he just shook his head. That distant look never leaving his eyes. It was just as the sun began its descent behind the Chicago skyline, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, that it happened. Sarah was cleaning up paper plates when she felt familiar arms wrap around her from behind. Jake's embrace was fierce, desperate, so different from his usual awkward teenage hugs that barely lasted a second. "Mom," he whispered against her ear, his voice thick with emotion. "I love you so much. You know that, right? No matter what happens, you know I love you." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She turned in his arms, studying his face. Tears had gathered in the corners of his eyes, and there was something in his expression that terrified her, a finality that made her stomach drop. "Jake, what's wrong? You're scaring me." He cupped her face with both hands, the way he used to when he was little and wanted her full attention. "Promise me you'll remember the good times. Promise me you'll remember how proud Dad was of both of us. And promise me you'll forgive me." "Forgive you for what?" Sarah's voice cracked. "Jake, talk to me. What's going on?" But instead of answering, he kissed her forehead, a gesture so tender and adult that it broke her heart. "I have to go. There's something I need to do." "Go where, Jake? It's almost time for fireworks. The whole family's here." "I'll be back," he said, but his eyes told a different story. "I promise I'll be back." Before Sarah could stop him, Jake was walking toward the front of the house. She followed, her bare feet slapping against the cool concrete of their driveway. "Jake, where are you going?" He turned back one last time, and in the fading daylight he looked so much like his father that Sarah's knees nearly buckled. "Take care of Mom for me," he called to Maria, who had appeared on the front porch. Concern etched across her features. "Jake," Sarah screamed. But he was already jogging down Oakwood Avenue, his figure growing smaller with each step. She started to run after him, but Maria caught her arm. "Sarah, wait. Let me get Tom. We'll follow him in the car." But by the time Tom had grabbed his keys and they'd piled into his SUV, Jake had vanished into the maze of Chicago streets. The city was alive with 4th of July celebration, thousands of people streaming toward Navy Pier. Music pouring from open windows, the distant boom of early fireworks echoing off buildings. Finding one teenage boy in this chaos would be like finding a needle in a haystack. "He couldn't have gone far," Tom said, cruising slowly down Michigan Avenue. "Sarah, think. Where would he go? Does he have friends in the area? A girlfriend?" Sarah pressed her face to the window, scanning every sidewalk, every crowd. "I don't know. He's been so secretive lately." Her voice trailed off, replaced by a sob that seemed to come from her very soul. They searched for 2 hours, driving through Lincoln Park, checking his school, even stopping by the comic book store where he used to work part-time. Nothing. It was as if Jake had simply evaporated into the Chicago night. As they finally headed back home, defeated and exhausted, the sky erupted in a magnificent display of fireworks over Navy Pier. Red, white, and blue explosions painted the darkness, each boom echoing in Sarah's chest like a heartbeat. But all she could think about was the look in her son's eyes, the finality in his voice, and the terrible certainty that something was very, very wrong. "Mom," Maria said softly as they pulled into the driveway, "we should call the police." Sarah nodded, though part of her resisted. Calling the police would make it real, would transform her fear into official concern. But as she looked at her empty house at the 4th of July decorations that now seemed to mock her with their cheerful patriotism, she knew they had no choice. Inside, while Tom made the call, Sarah stood in Jake's doorway, studying his room for clues. Everything looked normal at first glance. His unmade bed, clothes scattered on the floor, posters of his favorite movies covering the walls. But then she noticed his desk drawer was slightly open, and when she pulled it fully open, her blood ran cold. Inside was a manila envelope with her name written in Jake's careful handwriting. Her hands shook as she opened it, revealing a letter and several photographs. The letter was brief but devastating. "Mom, if you're reading this, then I've already gone to do what I have to do. I know you won't understand, and I know you'll be angry with me, but I need you to know that everything I'm doing is because I love you and Dad so much. The photos will explain everything. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you the truth. I'm sorry for a lot of things, but I'm not sorry for protecting you. Love always, Jake." With trembling fingers, Sarah spread the photographs across Jake's desk. What she saw made her legs give out, sending her crashing into his desk chair. The photos showed Jake with a group of men she didn't recognize, taken in various locations around Chicago. But it wasn't just social photos, there was something secretive, urgent about the gatherings. In one photo, Jake was accepting what looked like a large envelope from a man with a distinctive scar across his left cheek. The last photo was the most chilling. It showed Jake standing outside a warehouse she recognized from the news, the same warehouse where a major drug bust had taken place 3 months ago. The timestamp showed it was taken just 2 weeks after David's funeral. Sarah Maria's voice floated up from downstairs. "The police are here." But Sarah couldn't move. She stared at the photographs, her mind racing to piece together a puzzle she wasn't sure she wanted to solve. And why did she have the terrible feeling that his walk into the night wasn't random? That he was walking toward something specific, something dangerous. Outside, fireworks continued to explode across the Chicago sky. But inside Jake's room, Sarah Martinez felt her world crumbling around her. The son she thought she knew had secrets that ran deeper than she'd ever imagined. And somewhere out in the chaos of the 4th of July celebration, he was walking straight into danger. The question that haunted her as she finally made her way downstairs to talk to the police was simple but terrifying. Was she already too late to save him? Detective Ray Sullivan had seen his share of missing teenager cases, but something about Sarah Martinez's desperation cut through his professional detachment like a knife. At 52, with graying temples and tired eyes that had witnessed too much of Chicago's underbelly, he'd learned to read people quickly. Sarah wasn't a hysterical mother overreacting to a rebellious teen's late night out. She was terrified, and her terror was infectious. "Mrs. Martinez," he said gently, settling into the living room chair across from her. The remnants of the 4th of July party still decorated the space red, white, and blue streamers now looking garish under the harsh living room lights. "Tell me about the photographs." Sarah's hands shook as she handed over the manila envelope. Detective Sullivan examined each photo carefully, his expression growing more grave with each image. When he reached the warehouse photo, he cursed under his breath. "You recognize this place?" Sarah asked, though his expression had already given her the answer. "The Hartwell District Warehouse. We raided it in March. Massive fentanyl operation. Took down a network that had been operating for years." He looked up at Sarah, and she saw pity in his eyes that made her stomach lurch. "Mrs. Martinez, what did your husband do for work?" "He was a construction foreman, worked for Morrison and Associates for 15 years. Why?" Detective Sullivan was quiet for a long moment, studying David's photo on the mantelpiece, a handsome man in his 40s, wearing a hard hat and grinning at the camera. "I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. In the months before your husband's death, did you notice any changes in his behavior? Unexplained money? Unusual phone calls?" Sarah felt the room tilt around her. "What are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm trying to understand why your son has photographs connecting him to a major drug operation that we shut down." 3 months ago, the words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She thought back to those final months with David, searching her memory for signs she might have missed. Had there been changes? David had been working longer hours, coming home tired, and sometimes agitated. There had been phone calls that ended abruptly when she entered the room. And yes, there had been extra money David had explained away as overtime pay. He said he was working extra shifts, Sarah whispered. The overtime pay was helping us save for Jake's college fund. Detective Sullivan nodded grimly. Construction sites are perfect fronts for money laundering operations. Clean cash, legitimate workers, easy to hide irregular payments. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Mrs. Martinez, I think your husband might have gotten involved with some very dangerous people, and I think your son found out. Maria, who had been sitting silently in the corner, suddenly spoke up. That's impossible. David was a good man. Wouldn't good men sometimes make bad choices when they're desperate? Detective Sullivan interrupted. Especially when they're trying to provide for their families. Sarah's mind raced back to the months before David's death. They had been struggling financially. Her part-time job at the local elementary school barely covered their basic expenses, and David's union salary wasn't enough to cover Jake's upcoming college costs. David had been stressed, losing sleep, snapping at both her and Jake over minor things. The heart attack, Sarah said suddenly. David's heart attack? It wasn't random, was it? Detective Sullivan's expression told her everything she needed to. No. Stress can trigger cardiac events, especially in men with underlying conditions. But Mrs. Martinez, right now we need to focus on finding Jake. Based on these photos, I believe he's trying to finish something his father started, or trying to get out of something his father got into. The next few hours passed in a blur of phone calls, police interviews, and desperate planning. Detective Sullivan called in favors from contacts throughout the Chicago PD, putting out a BOLO alert for Jake. Sarah provided them with recent photos, a detailed description, and a list of every friend, teacher, and acquaintance she could think of. But it was Maria who made the connection that changed everything. Sarah, she said suddenly, looking up from Jake's laptop, which the police had given her permission to examine. Remember that job David took in Cicero last year? The one he said was just a one-time thing. Sarah nodded. David had worked a 3-week job in Cicero, a suburb known for its industrial complexes and, unfortunately, its reputation as a hub for organized crime activity. Look at this, Maria said, turning the laptop screen toward them. Jake's browser history showed repeated searches for addresses in Cicero, specifically around the area where David had worked. There were also searches for witness protection, police informants, and most chillingly, how to disappear completely. Detective Sullivan leaned forward, his interest piqued. Mrs. Martinez, did your husband ever mention anyone named Vincent Caruso? Sarah's blood ran cold. How do you know that name? Because Vincent Caruso runs the drug operation we busted at that warehouse. And because 3 weeks ago, we received an anonymous tip that helped us identify 2 more distribution points. In his network? The tip came from someone with detailed inside knowledge of their operation. The pieces of the puzzle began falling into place with horrifying clarity. David had gotten involved with Caruso's operation, maybe willingly for the money, maybe under coercion. After David's death, Jake had somehow discovered his father's involvement, and instead of coming to his mother or the police, Jake had decided to become an informant himself. He's been feeding information to the police, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. That's why he's been so secretive. That's why he was asking me to forgive him. And if Caruso's people have figured out who's been talking, Detective Sullivan didn't need to finish the sentence. Sarah shot up from the couch, pacing to the window where she could see the last of the fireworks fading in the distance. We have to find him. If he's in danger because he was trying to help Mrs. Martinez sit down. Detective Sullivan's voice was firm but gentle. We're going to find him, but you need to understand something. If Jake has been working as an informant and if Caruso's people have discovered his identity, then Jake isn't just missing, he's running for his life. The room fell silent except for the distant sound of 4th of July celebrations continuing throughout the neighborhood. Sarah sank back into her chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what her 17-year-old son had taken on alone. Why didn't he tell me? She asked, tears streaming down her cheeks. Why didn't he trust me enough to help him? Maria moved to sit beside her sister, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Because he's David's son, she said softly. He was trying to protect you the same way David tried to protect you. He was trying to be the man of the house. Detective Sullivan stood, checking his phone as it buzzed with an incoming message. His expression shifted from concern to urgency. We have a development. One of my contacts just reported gunshots in the Hartwell district, near the warehouse. Sarah felt her heart stop. You think it's Jake? I think your son walked into something tonight, and we need to get there fast. He was already moving toward the door, speaking rapidly into his radio. I need backup at the Hartwell warehouse. Possible shots fired, possible civilian in danger. As they prepared to leave Sarah, insisting she was coming despite Detective Sullivan's protests, she caught a glimpse of herself in the hallway mirror. 12 hours ago, she had been a single mother, preparing for a simple 4th of July celebration. Now she was racing through the Chicago night, chasing shadows and secrets that threatened to destroy what remained of her family. The fireworks had ended. But Sarah Martinez was about to discover that some fires burned long after the celebration is over. And sometimes, walking into that fire is the only way to find the truth even if it burns. Everything you thought you knew about the people you love most, as they sped through the empty streets toward the warehouse district. Sarah whispered a prayer into the darkness. Please let him be alive. Please let me get the chance to tell him that I understand, that I forgive him, that love is stronger than secrets. But in her heart, she feared they might already be too late. The Hartwell district at midnight looked like a scene from a post-apocalyptic movie. Abandoned warehouses lined both sides of the cracked asphalt street, their broken windows reflecting the occasional streetlight like dead eyes. Detective Sullivan cut the headlights as they approached the industrial complex, the silence broken only by the distant hum of machinery from the few businesses still operating in the area. Stay in the car, Detective Sullivan commanded Sarah for the third time. But she was already reaching for the door handle. That's my son in there, she said firmly. I'm not waiting in the car while he's in danger. Sarah, this isn't a negotiation. These people have killed before and they'll kill again if Jake doesn't have backup. Sarah's voice carried a steel. That surprised even her. Detective, I've been a mother for 17 years. I've faced down school bullies, emergency room doctors, and teenage attitude. I'm not about to let my son face armed criminals alone. Before Detective Sullivan could respond, his radio crackled to life. Detective Sullivan, this is Officer Martinez, no relation, the voice said with a slight chuckle that died quickly. We've got eyes on the warehouse. 2 vehicles parked outside, lights on in the main building, and Detective, we found a bicycle about a block away. Red Trek mountain bike fits the description of the missing kid's bike. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. Jake's bike. He had ridden his bike into this nightmare. How many officers do we have on scene? Detective Sullivan asked. For units, 12 officers total. We've got the building surrounded but no movement inside yet. Detective Sullivan looked at Sarah and she saw her own fear reflected in his eyes. Mrs. Martinez, I need you to understand something. We're going to get your son out of there, but this situation is extremely dangerous. If Vincent Caruso's people have Jake, they're not going to just let him walk away. What are you saying? I'm saying this might not end the way we want it to. Sarah felt something crystallize inside her, a determination that came from 18 years of loving Jake, from carrying him inside her body, from staying up all night when he had fever, from teaching him to ride a bike, from holding him when his father died. Detective Sullivan, let me tell you something about mothers and their children. We don't give up. We don't back down, and we sure as hell don't wait in the car. 20 minutes later, Sarah found herself crouched behind a police barricade, wearing a borrowed bulletproof vest that was too big for her frame. The SWAT team had taken positions around the warehouse, and Detective Sullivan was in contact with the building through a megaphone. This is Chicago Police. The building is surrounded. We want to resolve this peacefully. The response came in the form of a gunshot that shattered one of the few remaining windows on the warehouse's second floor. Jake, Sarah screamed before Detective Sullivan could stop her. Jake, if you're in there, we're here. You're not alone. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, incredibly, a voice called out from inside the building, young, scared, but unmistakably Jake's voice. Mom, is that really you? Tears streamed down Sarah's face. Yes, baby, it's me. Are you hurt? I'm okay. But Mom, there are 3 men in here, and they have guns and they know what I did. Detective Sullivan moved closer to Sarah. Speaking into his radio, we have confirmation the kid is alive and communicating. Suspects are armed. Another voice emerged from the warehouse, older and rougher. Lady, your kid's been causing us some serious problems. He's been talking to cops, sharing information that ain't his to share. Sarah felt rage surge through her, not the helpless anger of the past 8 months since David's death, but a fierce protective fury that made her feel powerful for the first time in ages. She grabbed Detective Sullivan's megaphone. Listen to me, she shouted. My name is Sarah Martinez. My husband David worked construction in this neighborhood. I don't know what kind of business you had with him, but my son is 17 years old. He's just a kid trying to figure out what his father was involved in. Your husband was a snitch, lady, and your kid's following in his footsteps. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, but they also filled in the final pieces of the puzzle. David hadn't just been involved with Caruso's operation, he had been informing on them. That's what had caused the stress. The late nights, the mysterious phone calls. David had gotten in over his head and had tried to get out by cooperating with law enforcement. If my husband was working with the police, then he was doing the right thing. Sarah called back, and so is my son. The right thing gets people killed in this neighborhood. It was Jake's voice that broke through the standoff. Mom, I need to tell you something. Dad was trying to protect us. He got involved with these guys because we needed money, but when he found out what they were really doing, selling drugs to kids, Mom, kids younger than me, he couldn't live with it. Sarah closed her eyes, finally understanding the burden her husband had carried in his final months. David, the man who had coached Jake's Little League team and volunteered at the local food bank, had discovered he was part of an operation that was destroying the very community he loved. He started giving information to Detective Patterson, Jake continued, but they found out, and that's when Dad had the heart attack. It wasn't random, Mom. The stress of knowing they were onto him, of knowing he'd put us in danger, killed him. Shut up, kid. The rough voice was closer to the window now, more agitated. Detective Sullivan was coordinating with his team, but Sarah barely heard him. All she could focus on was Jake's voice, strong despite his fear, telling her the truth she had been too afraid to see. After Dad died, I found his laptop, Jake called out. I found all the evidence he'd been gathering. Detective Patterson told me they needed more information to shut down the whole operation to make sure Dad's death meant something. So I kept watching, kept gathering evidence. And you kept your mouth shut about it. Sarah called back, her voice breaking. Oh, Jake, why didn't you tell me? Because I knew you'd try to stop me, and because I knew you'd blame yourself for Dad getting involved in the first place. But Mom, it wasn't your fault. Dad made choices and I made choices, and sometimes people make bad choices for good reasons. The truth of it washed over Sarah like a wave. All this time she had been drowning in guilt about David's death, wondering if she could have done something different, something more. But David had died trying to make amends for his mistakes, and Jake had been trying to honor his father's sacrifice. Mrs. Martinez, Detective Sullivan said quietly, we need to end this. My team is ready to move, but I need to know. There anything else Jake might have told you? Any other information that might help us understand what we're dealing with? Sarah thought about the photos, about the weeks of secretive behavior, about the way Jake had hugged her earlier that evening. He came here to make a trade, she said suddenly. He has something they want, and he was going to give it to them in exchange for leaving us alone. As if summoned by her words, Jake's voice rang out again. I have Dad's laptop. All his files, all his evidence. You can have it if you let me go, kid. That laptop's already cost us millions of dollars. You think we're just going to let you walk away? Sarah felt Detective Sullivan tense beside her. They're not planning to let him go, he said quietly into his radio. All units prepare to breach on my signal. But before anyone could move, the sound of breaking glass echoed from the warehouse, followed by running footsteps and shouting. A figure emerged from the building, Jake, running at full speed with a laptop bag clutched against his chest. Behind him, 3 men poured out of the warehouse, guns drawn. Time seemed to slow as Sarah watched her son sprint across the empty lot, his long legs covering ground quickly but not quickly enough. The men were gaining on him, and she could see in their posture, in the way they held their weapons, that they had no intention of letting him escape. Jake, she screamed, breaking free from Detective Sullivan's restraining hand and running toward the fence that separated the police perimeter from the lot. The first gunshot echoed across the industrial district like thunder. Sarah saw Jake stumble but keep running. The second shot followed immediately, and this time Jake went down, the laptop skittering across the asphalt. Sarah's world exploded into chaos. Police officers swarmed the lot, shouting commands. The 3 men from the warehouse were surrounded and surrendering. But Sarah only had eyes for the motionless figure lying on the cracked pavement. She reached Jake before the paramedics. Dropping to her knees beside him, blood was spreading across his shoulder and down his arm, but his eyes were open, focused on her face. Mom, he whispered. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I couldn't tell you. Sarah said, pressing her hands against his shoulder wound, trying to stop the bleeding. Don't talk. You're going to be okay. You're going to be fine. Did I do right? Dad would be proud, right? Sarah looked into her son's eyes, David's eyes, and saw not the 17-year-old boy who had been carrying the weight of adult secrets, but the child who used to crawl into her bed during thunderstorms, who used to ask her if she thought he was brave enough to be a superhero when he grew up. Your father is so proud of you, she said, her voice steady despite her tears. And so am I. You're the bravest person I know. As the paramedics took over, as Jake was loaded into an ambulance with Sarah by his side, Detective Sullivan approached with the recovered laptop. Mrs. Martinez, he said, This contains enough evidence to shut down Caruso's entire operation. Your husband and your son, they've probably saved dozens of lives, maybe hundreds. Kids who won't get hooked on drugs because of what they did? Sarah nodded, but she wasn't thinking about Vincent Caruso or drug operations or evidence. She was thinking about the hug Jake had given her earlier that evening, the way it had felt like goodbye. He had been preparing to sacrifice himself to protect her, to honor his father's memory, to make sure that David's death had meaning. But instead of a sacrifice, what had emerged from the fire was the truth, messy and painful and complicated, but ultimately redemptive. A family that had been torn apart by secrets was being forged back together by honesty. As the ambulance raced through the Chicago night toward the hospital, Sarah held Jake's uninjured hand and made a silent promise. No more secrets, no more carrying burdens alone, no more trying to protect each other by keeping the truth at bay. They had walked into the fire and they had survived. Now it was time to heal. 3 weeks later, Sarah sat in the waiting room of the Cook County District Attorney's office, watching Jake fidget with the sling that held his left arm. The bullet had shattered his shoulder blade but missed anything. Vitula miracle. According to the trauma surgeon who had operated on him that night, Jake would need physical therapy and would carry a scar for the rest of his life. But he was alive, and that was all that mattered to Sarah. "You nervous?" she asked him quietly. Jake shrugged with his good shoulder a little. "It's weird, you know, talking about Dad like this, like he was some kind of criminal." "Your father made mistakes," Sarah said, the words coming easier now than they had 3 weeks ago, but he tried to make them right. That doesn't make him a criminal, it makes him human. The past 3 weeks had been a whirlwind of police interviews, federal investigators, and media attention that Sarah hadn't been prepared for. The story of a 17-year-old boy who had risked his life to honor his father's attempt at redemption had captured Chicago's imagination. Local news stations had dubbed Jake the young hero of the 4th of July. Though Jake himself seemed embarrassed by the attention, Detective Sullivan emerged from the conference room, followed by a woman in her 40s wearing a crisp navy suit. District Attorney Jennifer Chen, who had been handling the prosecution of Vincent Caruso and his associates. "Jake, Mrs. Martinez," Ada Chen said warmly. "Thank you for coming in today. I know this hasn't been easy for either of you." They followed her into the conference room where several other officials were waiting. Sarah recognized Detective Patterson, the officer who had originally been working with David. He was a thin man in his 50s with kind eyes and graying hair, and when he saw Jake, his face lit up with genuine warmth. "Jake," he said, standing to shake hands, "I've been wanting to meet you properly. Your father was a good man who found himself in a bad situation. What he did, what you did, took real courage." Jake ducked his head, still uncomfortable with praise. "I just wanted to finish what Dad started." "Well, you did more than that, Ada," Chen said, opening a thick file. "The evidence on your father's laptop, combined with what you gathered over the past few months, has allowed us to dismantle the entire Caruso operation. 12 arrests, including Vincent Caruso himself. We've seized over $2 million in assets and enough fentanyl to supply half of Chicago." Detective Patterson leaned forward. "Jake, I want you to understand something. Your father came to me 8 months before he died. He was terrified not for himself, but for you and your mother. He'd gotten involved with Caruso's people because he needed money for your college fund, but when he realized they were selling drugs near schools, near kids your age, he couldn't live with it." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. Even now, learning new details about David's final months was painful. "He spent weeks gathering evidence," Detective Patterson continued. "Bank records, photographs, audio recordings. He was building an airtight case. But the stress of living a double life, of knowing he was being watched, of worrying about your family's safety, it was killing him, literally and figuratively." "The heart attack," Sarah said quietly. "The doctors said it was brought on by extreme stress and anxiety. Your husband died knowing he'd done the right thing, but worried that it wouldn't be enough to keep you and Jake safe." Jake was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Finally, he looked up at Detective Patterson. "When I found his laptop, when I read his files, I knew I had to finish what he started. But I was scared to tell Mom because I thought she'd blame herself for Dad getting involved in the first place." Sarah reached over and took Jake's good hand. "I did blame myself," she admitted. "I spent months thinking that if I'd been a better provider, if I'd worked more hours, maybe Dad wouldn't have felt pressured to make that choice." Mrs. Martinez, Ada Chen, interjected gently. "Your husband's decision to work with law enforcement saved lives. The drug operation he helped us uncover was responsible for dozens of overdoses, including 3 teenagers from Lincoln Park High School. By gathering that evidence, David prevented countless more." The room fell quiet as everyone absorbed the weight of that statement. Finally, Detective Sullivan spoke up. There's something else we need to discuss. The media attention around this case has been significant, and there may be ongoing safety concerns. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. What kind of safety concerns? Caruso had associates who weren't arrested in the initial sweep. Most of them have gone to ground or left Chicago entirely. But we want to make sure you and Jake are protected until we're certain there are no remaining threats. Jake sat up straighter. Are you saying we're in witness protection? Not exactly, Ada Chen said, but we are recommending some precautionary measures. New addresses, new phone numbers, possibly new schools for Jake's senior year, Sarah felt. The familiar weight of anxiety settled on her shoulders. Just when she thought they could start rebuilding their lives, there was another upheaval to navigate. But, Detective Patterson added quickly, there's also some good news. The federal government offers compensation for civilians who assist in major criminal cases. Between your husband's contribution and Jake's continued cooperation, your family is eligible for a substantial financial award. How substantial? Sarah asked, though part of her felt guilty for caring about money when they'd nearly lost Jake. Enough to cover Jake's college education completely, with enough left over for you to take some time off work. Maybe go back to school yourself if you want. Jake looked at his mother with amazement. Mom, you could finish your teaching degree. You could become a real teacher instead of just a substitute. Sarah had dreamed of completing her education degree for years, but the cost and time commitment had always seemed impossible as a single mother. Now, thanks to David and Jake's courage, that dream was within reach. There's one more thing, Detective Patterson said, pulling out a small digital recorder. Your father left this for you, Jake. He recorded it the night before he died, but we couldn't release it until the case was closed. With trembling hands, Jake took the recorder. Sarah moved closer to him as he pressed play. And suddenly, David's voice filled the room, warm, familiar, and heartbreakingly alive. Jake, if you're hearing this, then something's happened to me, and Detective Patterson thinks it's safe for you to know the truth. Son, I made some bad choices. I got involved with people I shouldn't have gotten involved with, and I put our family in danger. But I want you to know that everything I did wrong, I tried to make right. I gathered evidence. I worked with the police, and I did everything I could to make sure these people couldn't hurt other families the way they hurt ours. Jake's eyes filled with tears, and Sarah wrapped her arm around his shoulders. I know you're going to want to be angry with me, David's voice continued. And you have every right to be. But Jake, I need you to take care of your mother. She's the strongest person I know, but she's going to blame herself for my mistakes, and I can't bear the thought of that. You tell her that I loved her more than life itself, and that every choice I made, good and bad, was because I wanted to give you both the life you deserved. David's voice cracked with emotion. I'm proud of you, son. I'm proud of the man you're becoming. You're braver than I ever was, more honest than I ever was, and I know that whatever happens, you're going to do great things with your life. Just promise me you won't try to fix my mistakes by yourself. You have people who love you. Lean on them. The recording ended, leaving the room in profound silence. Jake was crying openly now, and Sarah felt her own tears flowing freely. He knew, Jake whispered. He knew I'd try to finish what he started. And he knew you'd need to hear that it wasn't your responsibility, Sarah said softly. Oh, Jake, we've both been carrying so much guilt. Dad made his choices and you made yours. And I've been so focused on blame that I forgot the most important thing. What's that we're a family? We're supposed to carry things together, not alone. Ada Chen cleared her throat gently. I'll give you both some time to process all of this, but I want you to know that the city of Chicago owes you a debt of gratitude. Your family's sacrifice has made our streets safer. As the meeting concluded and they prepared to leave, Detective Sullivan approached Sarah privately. Mrs. Martinez, I've been doing this job for 25 years, and I've seen a lot of families destroyed by situations like this, but I've rarely seen a family come through stronger. Your son is remarkable, his courage, his integrity, his loyalty. To his father's memory, you should be incredibly proud. Sarah looked across the room at Jake, who was talking quietly with Detective Patterson about the logistics of their upcoming move. In 3 weeks, he had gone from a secretive, burdened teenager to a young man who had faced down armed criminals and testified against organized crime figures. But more than that, he had learned to trust her with the truth, and she had learned to trust him with the complexity of adult problems. I am proud, she said. But more than that, I'm grateful. We could have lost each other to secrets and fear. Instead, we found each other in the truth. 2 months later, Sarah stood in the doorway of their new apartment in Oak Park, watching Jake pack his college acceptance letters. Northwestern had not only maintained his acceptance, despite his delayed graduation, but had offered him a full scholarship after learning about his role in the Caruso case. Several other universities had made similar offers, but Jake had chosen To stay close to home, you sure about Northwestern? Sarah asked, leaning against the doorframe. You could go anywhere now. Harvard called again yesterday. Jake grinned, the first completely carefree smile she'd seen from him in months. Mom, I spent half a year thinking I might have to disappear to protect you. I'm not going anywhere far from you anytime soon. Sarah felt her heart swell with love and gratitude. The apartment was smaller than their old house, but it felt more like home than anywhere they'd lived since David's death. There were no secrets. Here, no shadows lurking in corners. Just a mother and son rebuilding their life together, one honest conversation at a time. Besides, Jake added, someone needs to make sure you actually finish that teaching degree instead of just talking about it. Sarah laughed. She had enrolled in evening classes at DePaul University and would complete her degree the same semester. Jake finished his freshman year. The symmetry felt perfect, both of them starting new chapters, both of them moving forward instead of being trapped in the past. Jake, she said, I want to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. He looked up from his packing, eyebrows raised. Okay, shoot. Do you regret it? Any of it? Getting involved? Gathering the evidence? Nearly getting killed? Jake was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. I regret not trusting you sooner, he said finally. I regret thinking I had to handle everything alone. But do I regret honoring Dad's work? Do I regret helping put away people who were poisoning kids? No, I don't regret that at all. Even though it almost cost you your life. Mom, Dad's heart attack almost cost him his life too. But he kept gathering evidence because he knew it was the right thing to do. Sometimes doing the right thing is dangerous, but not doing the right thing is worse. Sarah nodded, understanding. At 17, her son had grasped something that had taken her decades to learn. That courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite fear when action is necessary. That evening, as they sat on their small balcony watching the sunset over Chicago, Sarah thought about the 4th of July 3 months ago. It felt like a lifetime had passed since Jake had hugged her in the backyard and walked away into the night. So much had changed. They had moved, Jake had graduated, the Caruso organization had been dismantled, and dozens of families would be safer because of David and Jake's courage. But the most important change was simpler and more profound. They had learned to trust each other with the truth, even when the truth was complicated and painful. Mom, Jake said suddenly, next 4th of July, can we just have a normal celebration? Like burgers and fireworks and no life-threatening situations? Sarah laughed, the sound carrying across the evening air like a promise. Deal, just burgers. And fireworks and boring, wonderful normalcy. As the stars began to appear over Chicago, Sarah Martinez felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Her son was safe, their future was secure, and the secrets that had nearly destroyed their family had been transformed into a foundation of trust and honesty. David would have been proud of both of them, of Jake's courage and Sarah's strength, of their ability to walk through fire and emerge not just intact, but stronger than before. The 4th of July would always hold a special meaning for their family now, not just as a celebration of independence, but as a reminder that sometimes the greatest act of love is walking into the fire to save the people you care about most, and sometimes, if you're very lucky, you walk out of that fire together, carrying the light with you into whatever comes next.